She kissed a stranger to avoid her toxic ex, unaware he was a mountain man who'd fall for her. In a dusty rail town where danger walks on two legs, a terrified woman makes one desperate choice. One kiss, meant to save her life, ties her fate to a man the town calls the Hermit of Birch Creek. He's rough, quiet, scarred by loss. She's running from a man who'd rather see her ruined than free. But when the law rides in with a false charge of abduction, the mountains themselves become a cage, and love the only way out. As snow buries their trail and whispers of betrayal rise, hearts will be tested, and faith will be the only weapon left. Because sometimes, one moment of fear leads to a lifetime of redemption. Will she risk everything to clear his name? Or will the kiss that saved her soul cost him his life? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The noon train screamed like a wounded thing as it slowed into Silvervale Station, its iron wheels throwing sparks against the rail. Smoke drifted low over the dusty platform, curling around the boots and skirts of travelers stepping down into the mountain town. Autumn sunlight burned through the haze, catching the edges of signboards and wagon wheels. The scent of coal smoke, horse sweat, and pine pitch mixed in the air. Victoria Whitfield stood near the end of the platform, a carpet bag clutched tight to her middle. Her gloves were dusty from travel, her bonnet slightly askew. She tried to look like any other passenger passing through, but her eyes kept darting toward the depot steps. She had taken the night train from Denver, sitting upright through the long hours, praying she would not be recognized. But fear was a thing that rode close. No matter how fast she ran, it seemed to keep pace beside her. And now, as she stepped down onto Silvervale soil, she saw the one face she had begged God not to see again. Eldon Cross. He stood near the telegraph office, hat pulled low, his fine coat dusty from travel, but still fine enough to mark him as a man of means. His sharp eyes scanned the platform, eyes that once had charmed her, then trapped her. Her heart stumbled in her chest. Victoria ducked behind a stack of freight crates, pressing her back to the boards. She tried to steady her breath, tried to think. She had letters of reference for a teaching position in Wyoming Territory. She had a ticket to ride the next stage out. But none of that would matter if Eldon found her. She heard his voice carry across the crowd, low, controlled, but furious. "Victoria, I know you're here." Her throat tightened. People turned, curious. A few stepped aside. He was moving down the platform, scanning faces, lifting gloved hands to shade his eyes. Victoria swallowed hard and prayed. "Lord, give me a way out. Please." The answer came in the shape of a stranger. A tall man stood by the freight, office, hat brim low, boots scuffed, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. His coat was rough homespun, his face weathered from wind and years. He wasn't watching the commotion, just buying supplies, counting coins slow and careful. Victoria's breath came quick. He was the first man she'd seen who looked like he had no stake in the crowd, no reason to question her. She moved before she could lose her nerve. Stepping from behind the crates, she walked straight to him, heart hammering so hard she thought the sound might give her away. He looked up just as she reached him, his blue-gray eyes steady but surprised. "Ma'am?" he said, quiet, uncertain. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Please, just don't move." And then she kissed him. The station noise faded to a hum. The world narrowed to the touch of her lips against his, light, trembling, desperate. For a heartbeat she tasted dust and smoke, felt the solid warmth of him, smelled the faint, clean scent of pine and leather. He froze for only an instant. Then his hand came up, not roughly but firm, to her shoulder. Behind them, Eldon's voice cracked like a whip. "What in heaven's name?" The stranger turned, eyes hard now, and put an arm around her. "My wife doesn't need your kind of talk," he said, voice low but carrying. Eldon stopped short, disbelief and fury warring on his face. "Your wife?" "That's right," the man said. "Now I'd be obliged if you stepped away." Murmurs rippled through the bystanders. Eldon looked around, saw the curious faces, and straightened his coat. His pride wouldn't let him cause a scene. He tipped his hat in mock politeness. "My mistake," he said tightly. "Didn't recognize the lady with her husband." He turned on his heel and strode towards the hotel. Victoria didn't breathe until he was gone. The stranger slowly let his arm drop. "Ma'am," he said, looking at her like a man trying to piece together a puzzle. "You care to tell me what that was about?" She flushed, shaking her head. I'm sorry. I just needed—" She faltered. "That man was going to hurt me." The stranger studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right." Just like that. No judgment, no scolding, just quiet acceptance. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what you just saved me from?" "I reckon I don't need to," he said simply. "You got someplace safe to go?" She hesitated. "Not yet. There's a stage west tomorrow. I can find a room till then." He looked down the street, then back at her. "Hotel will be the first place he checks. My place is up Birch Creek Way. Cabin's plain but safe. You can ride up with me till the storm clears." She hesitated again. Every part of her upbringing warned her not to go off with a strange man into the mountains. Yet something in his eyes, steady, kind, utterly without deceit, made her trust him. "All right," she said softly. "Just for a night or two." He nodded. "Name's Jonas Hale." "Victoria Whitfield," she said. "Much obliged for the introduction," he said. They gathered her carpet bag and walked toward the hitching post. As they passed the telegraph office, Victoria saw the operator glance up, then look toward the hotel. A chill prickled her neck. They mounted his horse. He lifted her gently into the saddle behind him and rode out of town as the sun dipped low. Behind them, Eldon Cross watched from the hotel balcony, his smile thin and cold. "Run as far as you like, Victoria," he murmured to himself. "You'll come back, or I'll fetch you." The trail wound through pines and golden aspen, up where the air thinned and the wind turned sharp. The sun slid behind the peaks, and shadows filled the canyons. Victoria clung to the saddle horn, the stranger's broad back steady before her. The rhythm of the horse's gait and the creak of leather were oddly comforting. After an hour, he spoke without turning. "You running from that man?" "Yes," she said. "He used to be my fiancé." He was silent for a long moment. "Used to be," he repeated. "I see." "He wouldn't let me go," she said softly. "So I ran." Another pause, then quietly. "You did right." The wind carried their words away. By the time the first flakes of snow began to fall, the valley below was a blur of dusk. They crossed a narrow bridge over a roaring creek and followed the trail to a small clearing. Jonas swung down and helped her dismount. The cabin stood before them. Sturdy logs, a stone chimney, smoke curling from the top. A hound barked once and came trotting out, tail wagging. "Scout," Jonas said, "meet our guest." Victoria knelt to pet the dog, who pressed his muzzle into her hand. "He's sweet," she said. Jonas smiled faintly. "Only barks at bears. You'll be fine." Inside, the cabin was warm from a fire. Simple but clean. Table, 2 chairs, shelf of books, a bed curtained off behind a quilt. A lantern hung from a hook, casting golden light over everything. Jonas poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. Ain't much supper left from yesterday, but there's jerky and beans. Thank you, she said. Truly. He nodded once, then sat opposite her. The fire popped softly. Outside, the wind howled over the ridge. After a while, he said, You can have the bed. I'll take the chair. I can sleep on the floor, she said quickly. Ma'am, he said with quiet finality, no woman sleeps on the floor in my house. Something in his tone, firm, protective, but not unkind, eased her nerves. She nodded. As she lay that night under a borrowed quilt, listening to the soft snore of the hound and the creak of timbers, she felt safe for the first time in months. She did not know yet who Jonas Hale truly was, or how deeply the lie she'd told on that platform would bind their lives. But as the storm thickened outside, she whispered a prayer of thanks, and somewhere in the mountains, fate shifted its course. Dawn came slow over the ridge, thin and pale at first, then bright enough to paint the cabin's log walls with a gentle gold. The storm had blown itself tired in the night. Only a sift of snow clung to the fir boughs and fence rails. Victoria woke to the pop of the fire and the soft scrape of iron on iron. For a breath, she did not know where she was. Then the smell of fresh coffee reached her, and memory settled. Train smoke, a desperate kiss on a platform, the long climb into the mountains, and this small room safe against the wind. She rose quiet, not wanting to wake the man in the chair, only to see he was already up. Jonas stood by the hearth with a long-handled spoon, stirring a blackened pot that hung over a bed of coals. He wore a clean but mended shirt, sleeves rolled, forearms brown with sun. His hair was damp where he had washed at the basin. He glanced over as she sat up, and his face eased a little, like a man pleased to find bad dreams had not returned. "Mornin'," he said. His voice was hushed, friendly but careful, like he did not want to crowd her. "Hope the bed treated you right." "It did," she said, smoothing the borrowed quilt and fixing her hair beneath her bonnet with a quick hand. "I slept well. Thank you." "Coffee's ready," he said. "Biscuits too, if you don't mind them a touch hard. I baked 'em last night while you slept. Didn't figure a lady ought to rise to nothing but jerky." She smiled, small and grateful. "That was kind." He poured coffee into a tin cup and set it on the table. He added a second, then lifted the lid on the Dutch oven and fished out biscuits with the spoon. The crusts were browned and a little uneven. Steam rose from them, and the cabin filled with a warm, homely scent that made Victoria's stomach tighten with sudden hunger. She came to the table. Scout thumped his tail under her hand, hopeful for crumbs. "You can call me Victoria," she said softly as she sat. "If that's agreeable." "Victoria," he answered, as if testing the shape of it. "Jonas is fine for me." They bowed their heads without planning to, and he spoke a short prayer, plain and respectful. "Lord, thank you for another sunrise, for food, and for the chance to do honest work today. Watch over this house and the folks in it. Amen." "Amen," she echoed. They ate without strain. He did not pry. She did not pour out everything at once. It felt like the safe middle ground that forms between strangers when both are trying to be decent. Outside, the creek ran loud from yesterday's snowmelt. Somewhere up the slope, a woodpecker rattled on a dead trunk. When they had finished, she stood and gathered the tin plates. "Please let me do the washing," she said. "I'm fresh and you've already done the cooking." He hesitated like he wanted to protest, then nodded. "Water's in the barrel there. I'll fetch more when the sun's higher. You'll want to boil a kettle first, on account of the creek." She filled a basin, set a kettle on the flame, and rolled up her sleeves. She found a cake of lye soap and a rough dishcloth on the shelf, and went to work. The simple task settled her spirit. Each plate cleaned and dried felt like adding a small stone to a cairn of order. Jonas stepped into his boots, shrugged into his coat, and reached for his hat. "I'll see to the horse," he said. "Got hay under the lean-to. Holler if you need me." "I will," she said. The door closed behind him. Cold air rushed in, then was gone. She listened to the crunch of his boots on the frozen yard and the soft, friendly murmur he kept for the gelding, the kind of low talk that calms an animal and says a lot about a man. She washed the cups and wiped the table, then straightened the bed and folded the quilt with careful hands. On the shelf by the window she found a few books, a Bible with a cracked leather spine, a tattered handbook on trapping and skins, a slim volume of poems. She touched the Bible. The leather felt warm from the sun on the glass. She left it where it was. A draft curled under the door. She noticed a gap near the hinge where the log had settled. She found a folded rag and wedged it there. The floorboards creaked like old men shifting in church. The cabin was not fancy, but everything in it had been chosen and kept with quiet pride. It reminded her of the schoolhouse in Kansas. Plain, sturdy, meant to last. Jonas came back in with snow melting on his hat brim. He stamped his boots and shut the door quick to keep in the heat. "Horses fed," he said. "I set a split log by the door. You can take kindling from that box, if you please. I'll cut more this afternoon." "May I help?" she asked. He looked at her, weighing something. "I won't have you do a man's hard work," he said, "but there's plenty I can show you if you aim to learn." "I do," she said. "I want to be useful. I can sew and keep house, and I can teach. Out here I reckon I need more." He nodded once. "Fair enough. We'll start easy." He stepped to the hearth and showed her how to rake coals, how to bank them to keep the heat steady, how to hang the pot so it neither scorched nor cooled. He took a small hatchet from under the bench and split a kindling stick into 4 thin shingles. "Keep the blade away from your fingers," he said. "Let the hatchet do the work. You don't need to fight it." She tried. The first blow landed crooked and sent the kindling skittering. She laughed despite herself. The second landed true. By the third, she found a rhythm. "It is like the metronome in the schoolhouse," she said, cheeks warm with effort. "Keep the beat and do not rush." "Exactly so," he said. "You're quick." They carried in more wood, stacked it by the fire, swept chips from the floor. Jonas showed her where the flour sack and salt sat in the cupboard, where he kept bacon wrapped in a cool cloth by the door, where he hung his rifle high on pegs, so it was near but not careless. She noticed how he moved around the room, quietly, without waste. Every task had a place, and he returned tools as soon as he finished, like a man who had learned the cost of losing things when snow hid the world. By mid-morning the sun was clean and bright over the ridge, turning drops of melt on the eaves into beads of light. Jonas brought in 2 buckets and set them near the stove. "Creek's fierce today," he said. "We'll boil this lot, safer that way. After we eat, if you're set to, I'll show you the path to the spring that don't freeze. It's uphill and tight, and you don't go alone until you know the footing." "I'll mind you," she said. The words came easy, and she felt their weight. She had not minded a man's direction in a long time, not without fear. This felt different. It felt like good order, not control. They ate a simple noon meal, bacon crisp, eggs fried in bacon grease, biscuits warmed on a flat stone, and coffee that made her eyes prickle with tears for how strong it was. Scout lay at Jonas's boot with his chin on his paws, content. The thick piece of hard work well begun filled the room. After they ate, Jonas took down a pair of snowshoes from pegs by the door. "These are old," he said. Got him from a Ute trader down valley years back. He taught me to walk right. You step like this, wide and steady, and you don't forget where your feet were a breath ago. He strapped the frames to his boots and handed Victoria a walking stick, then showed her how to loop the leather over her shoes. She stood gingerly, arms out, and laughed. I feel like a crane. You'll feel worse if you try a run, he said, but his eyes lit at her laugh. Come on, creek first, then the spring. They stepped into the yard, the snowshoe webbing spreading their weight. The snow complained at first, then bore them. Sun flashed on the creek where water ran fast between ice beards. The air smelled of clean timber and the sharp, sweet tang of pitch. Jonas led, setting a slow pace. He pointed with his stick. That's moose sign there, big as a wagon. You give him room if you see him. He don't want you, but he won't move for you either. Those are rabbit tracks. See how they bunch and then spread? He was running. She bent to look. The little paired dents ran under a bush and vanished. She felt a child's quick joy at reading a page of the world she had never known before. Thank you, she said, for teaching. Much obliged you want to learn, he said. The spring lay up a narrow slot where rock rose steep and dark on both sides. Ferns clung to the stone where water bled through even in winter. A trickle sang under ice and came out at a shallow pool no wider than a wash basin. Steam feathered the air above it. Jonas knelt, scooped water with a tin dipper, and drank. Sweet, he said. Colder than a banker's heart. We fill a bucket from here for cooking and keep it near the stove so it don't chill you to death. He dipped the bucket and handed it to her. It was heavy. She steadied it against her skirt with one hand and the stick with the other, and stepped slow as he had shown her. A person could slip, she said, panting a little. A person could, he agreed, which is why we don't rush. They made it to the yard without mishap. Victoria's arms trembled from the weight, but pride warmed her. Inside, they set the bucket by the stove to settle. Jonas took off the snowshoes and hung them up. Victoria rubbed life back into her hands and blew on her fingers. She glanced at the books again, at the few small things that made this room a home. An old wooden horse on the shelf, a woman's shawl folded neat on a peg, a dried bouquet in a jar, brown and brittle from age. Her eyes touched the shawl and moved away out of courtesy. It was not hers to see, not yet. She felt something in the air around it, not a ghost, but a hush, like a place where prayer had once been frequent and then had stopped. Jonas caught the direction of her glance. His face went still and turned kindly all at once. If you need extra warmth, he said after a beat, there's another blanket in the chest by the bed. Thank you, she said, eyes steady, letting the small mercy of that change subject stand. He nodded, grateful she had not pressed. I'm headed to the woodpile, he said. We'll need a cord stacked close if weather turns mean again. You can mend by the window if you like. There's a tear in that curtain that's bothered me since last spring. I'd be glad to, she said. He took up his axe and stepped outside. The first thuds of the blade sounded like a clock, regular and patient, echoing between trees. She found a sewing basket near the shelf. Needles polished bright with use, coarse thread, a little tin of pins. She sat by the window where sunlight poured and began small, careful stitches. Her hands remembered the rhythm. She had hemmed dresses for motherless girls back in Kansas and patched boys' elbows that had found too much fence to climb. After a while, she hummed under her breath, not even knowing she had begun. The tune was one that worked into a person when they had spent long hours in a one-room school and longer hours in Sunday meeting. There is a fountain. She stopped herself and chose a livelier piece. At the cross, She did not sing words, only the shape of them. She sewed that curtain whole again, and then took up a torn work shirt laid over the chair back. She stitched through the shoulder where wear had thinned the fabric. Her small neat work felt like setting a bone that had been out of place. In the yard, the axe paused, then resumed. She thought of Eldon's voice on the platform, cold as a north wind. She felt the old dread rise, then fall. She looked around this room that smelled of coffee and wood smoke, and told her heart, steady now. She said it twice, and meant it the second time. By mid-afternoon, the woodpile near the door had grown to a waist-high wall. Jonas came in with pine chips in his hair, and sweat shining at his temple, though the air was cold. He hung his coat on a peg, and set the axe by the door, careful of the edge. He washed at the basin, poured fresh water with the dipper, scrubbed his hands and face, and dried on a rough towel hung near the stove. "You mind if I boil up some beans and salt pork?" he asked. "We'll eat early and do chores before dusk." "I'd like to cook," she said, "if you will show me how your stove likes to be treated." He grinned quick, a flash of white that took 10 years off him. "She's an old lady," he said, patting the iron. "You treat her gentle and she'll do you proud. Too hot and she'll scorch you just to prove she can." They cooked together, moving easy around each other as if they had done it for more than a day. He trimmed the pork and cut it into tidy cubes. She rinsed the beans and picked out small stones. He set a pot on the trivet and showed her how to add a spoon of molasses near the end so it did not make the beans tough. She sliced a small onion, eyes stinging, and laughed when a tear ran down her cheek. He chopped a carrot to stretch the pot and said, "Don't tell any mountain man you put a carrot in beans, or he'll faint dead away." "I won't," she said solemnly. "I will defend your honor." "Much obliged," he said, and she could tell the lightness did him good. The beans simmered. The room filled with a rich, sweet, meaty smell that made Scout whine in his sleep. Jonas baked biscuits on the lid, turning them with a fork so they browned even. Victoria made coffee and warmed 2 plates at the hearth so supper would not cool too fast in the chill air. They ate with good appetite, not greedy, not stiff. They spoke of small things, how the creek changed its voice as snowmelt rose, how the chickadees came bold when crumbs were offered, how the pine cones this year ran long and heavy, which meant a strong winter, some said. "Are you sorry you brought me here?" she asked at last, the question quiet, work-worn but brave. He set down his cup and thought before he answered. "No," he said. "I ain't sorry. This is a free valley. If a person aims to be decent and work, there's room for him. That's all a man can ask of a neighbor." "I will be the best neighbor I can be," she said softly, "until the stage goes west and I find my post." He nodded, accepting both parts, the promise to help and the truth that she meant to move on. Something like a shadow crossed his face, quick as a bird over snow. It left a stillness that did not feel heavy. It felt honest. Dusk drew its gray shawl over the trees. They cleaned the dishes together. He dried while she washed. The kettle hissed like a contented cat. After, he took up a lantern and said, "I'll make a last check on the gelding and bank the coals for the night. If you step out, pull the door to until it latches. Wind plays tricks on it." "I'll sweep and set the bread to soak for tomorrow's breakfast," she said. "Bread pudding stretches a day, even when it starts as old biscuits." He looked surprised and pleased, and she felt a small pride bloom that had nothing to do with triumph and everything to do with usefulness. She mixed a spoon of sugar and a little molasses into milk, beat in an egg, and poured it over biscuit pieces in a tin. She set the tin near the back of the stove, where it would warm without cooking. She swept the floor in neat lines. She shook crumbs outside for the birds and returned quick, snapping the latch as the wind pushed at the door like a friendly bear. Jonas came back in with the lantern glowing. He hung it on a peg and kicked snow from his boots. "Weather's turning again," he said. "You can smell it in the air when it's got teeth." She sniffed and nodded. "It smells like iron." "That's it," he said, half smiling. "Like iron." They sat a while by the fire, not saying much. He whittled at a small block of pine, the knife flashing in the firelight, curls of pale wood falling to his knee. She watched the figure take shape. A little horse, rough at first, then with a true neck and a proud lift to the head. He did not measure, only saw it inside the wood and set it free. "It is beautiful," she said when he set the knife down. "I will never look at a scrap of pine the same way again." "It ain't much," he said, shy of praise. "Helps a man quiet his mind." "Mine needed quiet," she said. "You gave me that today." He looked into the fire. "We traded then," he said. "You gave me a house with a woman's voice in it again." Silence folded around them, warm as a wool blanket. She did not ask about the shawl or the dried bouquet. He did not speak of the grave she had not yet seen. Some things came in their own right hour. The fire burned lower. He stood and stretched, the movement slow and loose after a long day's work. "Best turn in," he said. "Morning comes quick up here. I'll put on coffee before sunup and see if the trail's passable. If it is, we'll fetch flour from the lower cache tomorrow afternoon. Weather may trap us a while." "I understand," she said. "I will bake bread if we have enough flour. If not, I will learn to make flapjacks thin enough to see the light through." He chuckled. "You do that, and you'll have earned your seat by the fire for good." She doused the lamp while he banked the coals, raking ash over them until they glowed like hidden embers in a giant's pipe. The cabin breathed and settled. Wind went busy round the eaves and then moved off down the draw, chasing some mischief only wind knows. Victoria changed behind the quilt, folded her dress, and slid into the bed that smelled of soap and sunshine. Jonas took his blanket and the chair by the hearth again. She saw him tuck the blanket around his knees, saw Scout circle once and settle at his boots. The dog sighed. The last light from the hearth made a friendly orange ribbon along the floor. "Good night, Jonas," she said into the dim. "Good night, Victoria," he answered. She lay awake for a few heartbeats, listening to the creak and the far-off creak of trees. She thought of the schoolhouse bell in Kansas, the one she had pulled each morning, how its sound rung out over empty prairie and drew children like birds to grain. She wondered if there was a bell in these hills, and what kind it might be. Perhaps the creek was the bell here, and the wind its rope. Her eyes grew heavy. She tucked her hands under her cheek and breathed a simple prayer for safety and truth. The prayer did not ask for anything fancy. It asked for the small mercies that make a life. Warm bread, a kind word, steady work, a roof that keeps out rain, the strength to face a hard man without fear. Sleep came the way dawn had. Slow and then sure. Outside, clouds moved like cattle across the moon. Snow began again as the world turned toward midnight. The flakes fell light at first, then thicker, soft white laying clean on tracks and fences and the lean-to roof. Inside, the cabin kept its own small world. The last coal winked in the hearth like a watchful eye. The shawl on the peg hung still. The new-mended curtain barely stirred at the seam she had made whole. Morning would come, and with it, chores and paths and questions. She would step out into that day and find more of the truth of this place, and of the man who had guarded her with nothing but his name and a steady arm. For now, the night held them, two souls at rest under one humble roof, while Birch Creek sang its winter song just beyond the walls. And when dawn returned, clear or gray, warm or sharp as iron, they would meet it together, one task at a time. Morning dawned steel gray and quiet. Snow lay deep around the cabin, piled like white quilts over logs and fence rails. Smoke rose straight from the chimney, thin and blue, into a sky still holding the taste of frost. Inside, the air was soft with warmth. Jonas had been up for an hour, the smell of coffee and cornbread already filling the room. Victoria stirred, blinking away the last of her dreams. For a moment she thought she heard the sound of school bells, then remembered where she was. She sat up, stretching her arms, and watched the mountain light crawl across the cabin floor. Jonas glanced up from the hearth, his features calm, lined by the firelight. "Mornin'," he said gently. "Weather broke. Sun might show itself today." "It's a fine thought," she said, smiling. He poured her a cup of coffee and added a spoon of sugar before sliding it across the table. "Didn't figure you for bitter grounds," he said. She laughed softly. "I've swallowed worse, Mr. Hale, but I'll take the kindness." They ate cornbread and fried bacon in easy quiet. The peace between them had grown in small, steady ways, one gesture, one look, one shared task at a time. The silence felt companionable, not heavy. After breakfast, Jonas set on his coat and hat. "You care to walk a spell? Ground's firm enough now the snow's crusted. I'll show you the creek proper and the line where my traps run. No danger if we stay on the ridge." "I'd like that," she said, wrapping her shawl close. The air outside was cold enough to sting, but bright. The creek below shone under a skin of ice, water singing in narrow places. Jonas led, his boots cutting slow tracks through the snow. Scout ran ahead, his tail a small banner against the pale light. For a time, they walked in silence. She could hear her own breath, the distant rush of water, and the creak of snow underfoot. The mountains seemed endless, folding into one another like old quilts. Jonas stopped at a rise overlooking the valley. "Down there's Birch Creek," he said. "Traps run along that bend. Marten mostly, sometimes fox. Ain't much trade this year, but enough to keep coffee and salt in the barrel." "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Lonely, but beautiful." He nodded. "Lonely's not the worst thing a man can be. I've seen worse." She looked at him, the lines around his eyes deepened by the cold. There was a kind of quiet ache in his gaze, an echo of something old. She wanted to ask what had broken him, but the question felt too heavy for the morning light. Instead, she said, "Do you ever grow weary of it? The quiet?" He thought a moment. "Sometimes, but the mountains don't lie to a man. Towns do." They turned back toward the cabin, following the creek upstream. As they rounded the last bend, Victoria saw something ahead, a small clearing marked by a rough-hewn wooden cross. The snow there was cleared in a neat square. Her steps slowed. Jonas stopped beside her. His hand tightened on the strap of his satchel. "That's my wife and daughter," he said quietly. "Flood took 'em 7 years back, down in the lower valley. I brought 'em here after. Didn't want the railroad laying tracks over their rest." Victoria bowed her head. The cross was simple, carved by hand, the letters faint but careful. Sarah and Lucy Hale, 1875. In God's hands. The words blurred as tears pricked her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Jonas nodded once, jaw tightening. "I was guiding a party north that week. Came home to find the house gone. The creek rose quick from the thaw, no warning." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken pain. Victoria reached out, resting a gloved hand lightly on his sleeve. "You did all you could," she said softly. Some things aren't ours to stop." He didn't answer, but his shoulders eased a little. Scout sat near the grave, ears twitching, waiting as if standing watch. Jonas took off his hat, head bowed, and murmured a short prayer under his breath. When he straightened, the weight in his face had softened. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I don't often bring anyone here." "It's an honor," she said simply. They walked back to the cabin without speaking. The wind whispered through the pines like an old hymn. Inside, the warmth met them again, wrapping around like a blanket. Victoria took off her shawl and went to stoke the fire. Jonas set his rifle by the door and poured fresh water into the kettle. The simple rhythm of daily chores settled them both. By noon, she was kneading dough for bread while he mended a broken trap spring. The sound of her hands on the dough, soft thump, fold, turn, filled the small room. "You keep house like you were born to it," he said after a time. "I was born to teach," she said, smiling faintly. "But a woman on her own learns quick what's needed." He grunted, a sound of respect. "Teaching's good work. World needs it." "So does the soul," she said. He looked up at that, meeting her eyes. For a moment the room seemed to still, the fire's crackle the only sound. Then he looked away and said, "Reckon that's true." That afternoon, the wind rose again, bringing flurries across the valley. Jonas fetched wood while she swept the floor and hung wet mittens near the hearth. When he came back in, shaking snow from his hat, she said quietly, "You loved them dearly." "I still do," he answered. "Every day." "Love like that doesn't die," she said. "It changes shape." He studied her, as though trying to decide if she was right. "Maybe," he said at last. "You sound like someone who's lost, too." She hesitated. "I suppose I did lose something. Maybe it was the notion that love must be chained to obedience." He looked puzzled. "My father died when I was 16, she said, voice low. "He told me to marry a good man, one who honored God. I thought I did. But I learned some men hide their cruelty behind fine words. Eldon wanted a wife he could keep, not love." Jonas's jaw hardened. "He the one from the station?" She nodded. "Then he's a fool," Jonas said simply. She smiled faintly, but there was gratitude behind it. "You're kind to say so." "I'm just honest," he said, "and I ain't never seen honesty hurt a person as bad as lies do." The storm built outside, wind moaning down the chimney. She poured him coffee, and they sat by the fire, listening to the sound. "You ever think of leaving these mountains?" she asked. "Used to," he said. "Now they're the only place I can breathe right." "I think I understand that," she said softly. He looked at her again. Really looked this time. And something new passed between them, quiet as the snow settling outside. When evening came, Jonas lit the lamp and fetched his Bible from the shelf. He turned it over in his hands before setting it on the table. "Used to read this every night," he said. "Haven't in a long while." Victoria wiped her hands on her apron and came closer. "Would you like me to read a passage?" He hesitated, then nodded. She opened the worn pages and read aloud, her voice soft but clear. "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit." Jonas sat very still. After a while, he said quietly, "I thought he'd stopped listening." "He never stops," she said. "Sometimes we just quit talking first." He looked into the fire for a long time, then said, "You've got a way of making hard things sound simple." "They are simple," she said. "Not easy, but simple." That night, after supper, the wind fell. Stars came out like 1,000 cold fires over the ridge. Jonas went to check the barn, and Victoria stood by the window, watching the dark valley below. She could see the faint line of the grave clearing through the trees, moonlight touching the cross like a silver hand. She whispered a prayer for the woman and child resting there and for the man who still carried them in his heart. Then she added one more, quiet and trembling. Thank you for the stranger who became my shelter. When Jonas came back inside, she turned from the window, smiling. He nodded toward the fire. Best get rest, he said. Weather'll hold tomorrow. We can ride down for flour and post that letter you wrote. Yes, she said. Tomorrow. But even as she answered, a flicker of unease passed through her. She thought of Eldon somewhere out there, still hunting for her. The peace she'd found felt fragile as ice underfoot. And she knew, deep down, that the past had not finished with her yet. Dawn came bright and sharp, the kind of clear that made every ridge and tree line seem close enough to touch. Frost rimmed the window glass like white lace. The creek below ran like hammered steel under its skim of ice. Victoria woke to the sound of Jonas splitting kindling with short, careful blows that kept the axe from biting too deep. The cabin smelled of coffee, wood smoke, and bacon warming in a pan. She dressed quick, smoothed her hair, and tied her apron. When she stepped from behind the quilt, Jonas glanced up. He had already washed. His face looked fresh and stern all at once, in the way of men who met mourning as a duty. Good day to you, he said. Sky's true blue. If it holds, we can plan that ride for flour tomorrow. Best to spend today mending what the storm worked loose. I am ready to help, Victoria said. Tell me what is needed. We start with the lean-to, he said. Snow drifted heavy there. I heard a groan in the timbers last night. Could be a beam sagging. They ate fast. He poured coffee for her and set out slices of bacon and biscuits he had warmed on the hearthstone. They bowed their heads. He spoke the blessing in a low voice, simple and sure. She answered Amen, and the word felt like a nail set true into wood. Outside, the snow shone so bright it made her eyes water. The air had a clean tin taste that sharpened her breath. Jonas handed her a pair of wool mittens and a scarf. Sun looks kind, he said, but she can still bite. They crossed the yard. Scout ran ahead and then returned, weaving close to their knees as if herding them. The lean-to barn stood on the north side of the cabin, a shelter of rough logs and sawn boards. Jonas rapped on a post and set his ear against it. He rapped again, then pushed his shoulder up under the main beam. The wood gave a little. There it is, he said. Snowload warped it. If the next storm lays in heavy, it'll settle more. What do we do? Victoria asked. We shore it now, he said, and fix it proper after the thaw. He pointed with his chin toward a pile of short poles. Bring 2 of those, I'll notch them. She fetched the poles one by one, breath puffing in little clouds. Jonas set the first on a sawhorse and cut a shallow saddle with his hatchet, then did the same on the second. He slid both under the beam and tapped them snug with the butt of the hatchet. The groan stopped. Much obliged, he said. You've got a good back for work. Careful hands. I have the will to learn, she said. The skill will follow. He smiled a little. That's half the battle won. They cleared the roof with snow shovels, working from the edges inward, so they did not trap themselves under a slide. Snow slid off in long curls and fell soft beside the wall. The gelding in the stall watched them through the open slats, ears twitching. Jonas fed the horse fresh hay and checked the shoes for loose nails. He showed Victoria how to brush the gelding's coat in slow strokes that lay the hair flat and bring up a warm shine. By mid-morning, the sun climbed higher and the air softened. They turned to the fence that ran along the garden plot. 2 rails had cracked under the weight of snow. Jonas set a new post, tamped the soil with a bar, and set rails square. Victoria held them level while he hammered in wooden pegs. The sound rang in the cold like a hammer on a church bell. They worked without rush. He explained each step as if he were teaching a new hand who had never cut fence in her life. She asked short questions and repeated back the words he used: post, tenon, mortise, peg, like a lesson. Each answer made the next task lighter. When their breath smoked heavy and their gloves turned wet, he nodded to the cabin. "We'll warm up," he said. "Then we'll see to the roof beam inside. The storm took a swipe at that too." They stripped off wet mittens and set them near the stove. Victoria heated water and made a kettle of coffee stout enough to set a spoon up. She sliced 2 apples from the store box and fried them in a spoon of bacon grease with a pinch of brown sugar. The smell rose sweet and sharp, and they ate the apples over warm biscuits with a few drops of molasses. Scout watched with his best manners and got the last slice for his patience. Jonas brought in the short ladder and leaned it under the main roof beam. "She sagged a finger's width," he said. "I can push it up, but I'll need you to slip the brace in when I say." "I can do it," Victoria said. He climbed slow, boots firm on the rungs. At the top, he set his shoulder under the beam and pressed up with a slow breath. The wood creaked but moved. His biceps corded under his shirt. The line of his jaw clenched. "Now," he said through his teeth. Victoria slid the brace upright, fitting the notch against the beam. It did not seat. She tapped it with the heel of her hand. Still not true. She grabbed the small mallet from the table and gave it 2 quick knocks. The brace jumped into the notch and held. Jonas eased his shoulder down and tested the beam with a hand. He ran his palm along the joint, then climbed down. "Strong as a vow," he said. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Fine work." Her cheeks were pink from the rush and the praise. "I only hit it twice," she said. "You hit it right," he answered. "That's the trick." They lowered the ladder and set it away. Jonas pressed his hand flat to the brace one last time, as if thanking it. He stepped back and nodded. "Storm can blow as it pleases now," he said. "The house will stand." Victoria looked around the room with a quiet pride that surprised her. It was not her cabin, not yet, but her hands were in it now. That mattered. They spent the rest of the morning on small tasks. She mended a seam on the curtain she had sewn the day before, then turned a torn flour sack into sturdy dishcloths. He sharpened the axe with a slow, even stroke on a whetstone and checked the rifle's sights, then cleaned it with an oiled rag. He showed her how to twist cordage from scraps of cotton so nothing useful went to waste. She swept under the bed and found a small carved button. She set it on the shelf for safekeeping. Near noon, clouds stacked slow and white on the far ridge, but the weather held. Jonas opened the door and listened to the wind as if it spoke a language he knew. "We can take a short walk," he said. "I want to show you where the trail starts for the lower road, so you know it with your own eyes." They bundled again and set out. The trail cut east from the yard, slipped through a stand of young firs, and dropped into a shallow draw. In 200 paces, it forked. He showed her the top branch that followed the contour and the lower branch that slid to the creek crossing. "This is the way to town," he said, pointing to the lower fork, "but you don't take it if drift has laid over the cut bank or if the ice looks dark. You take the highway then, even if it adds an hour. A body who saves 10 minutes today might lose a life tomorrow. I learned that slow, and it cost me dear." She nodded, the words settling heavy and right. "I will remember." He stepped closer to the bank and spread his boot across a shelf of ice. It held clear as glass, and the creek showed under it. "You listen to your feet," he said. If they ask questions, you answer them. If they ask twice, you turn back." They stood a moment, hearing the creek talk under the ice. It sounded like water reading from a long, slow book. Victoria watched a bubble slip along, far below. It was like watching a thought pass through a head and vanish. They returned to the cabin before the sun reached the steepest part of the sky. Victoria sliced salt pork and put on a pot of beans left from last night, adding a spoon of molasses and a clap of mustard near the end. She shaved thin curls of cabbage, set them with vinegar and a pinch of sugar, and made a plain slaw. Jonas warmed the last of the cornbread on the iron and brewed fresh coffee. They ate at the table with their sleeves pushed up, and the map of the day still on their hands. At last, when the plates were cleaned and Scout had licked his whiskers for the third time, the day's talk turned toward the thing that had lived between them quiet as a low fire. "May I ask you something?" Victoria said. She folded her hands and studied her fingers, then raised her eyes to his face. "You spoke words over your family's grave. You set your hat aside. That was faith." He leaned back, slow, as if he were easing into a memory he knew would ache. "It was a habit," he said. "Hard to break even when a man aims to." "Do you mean you stopped praying?" she asked. "After the flood?" "I did," he said. He turned the coffee cup in his big hands. "Or maybe I kept talking but quit expecting there was anyone listening back. The words felt like smoke. They rose and they faded and they left me with nothing but the smell of them." "Did that help?" she asked. "Or hurt?" He gave a short breath that was not quite a laugh. "It kept me standing. It did not keep me warm." Victoria set her elbows on the table and leaned closer. "When I was a girl," she said, "my father read from the good book each night. He would say the Lord keeps all his promises, only he keeps them in his time, not ours. I did not like that. I wanted him to move when I rang like a bell. Later, when I came to the end of myself, I learned that sometimes faith is a winter thing. It looks asleep, but it is only waiting under the snow." Jonas watched her with an intent, almost hungry stillness. "What did you ask for?" he said. "At the end of yourself?" "A door," she said. "Any door. A way out from a man who thought he owned me. A path where I could still keep my name." He glanced towards the door, as if he could see through the wood to the train platform far below. "You took the first door you saw," he said, "right into a fool's arms." "I took the first door God opened," she said, and her voice had a small tremble of heat in it, like a coal stirred in ash. "I kissed a stranger because I believed the Lord had laid that stranger in my path. I had never done such a bold thing. I thought my heart would stop, but my feet moved, and you did not shove me away." He set his cup down like a man who wanted his hands free to hold something that could not be held. "I did not shove you away," he said. They sat in the quiet that follows truth. The stove breathed softly. The brace they had set hummed its deep wood note into the bones of the house. After a time, he spoke again. "I used to pray like a soldier gives a report," he said. "Straight facts, no fuss. After the water took them, I quit reporting. I went to ground. The mountains were my excuse. All that wind and stone can make a man think he is safe in his quiet, but quiet is not the same as peace." "Peace comes like a person," she said. "You let it in or you don't." He gave her a steady look, and for a heartbeat she felt something pass between them that wasn't yet love but was kin to it. It was a recognition, a naming. Two people who had survived different storms and somehow ended up on the same dry island. The afternoon turned thin and bright as the sun fell to the ridge. Jonas pulled on his coat and took up the snowshoes from their pegs. "One last chore," he said. "I've a snare line up along the old logging track. We can run it before dusk. Teaches the eye to see." "I will follow your steps," she said. They went out into air so clean it almost rang. They crossed the yard and moved into the shadow of the firs. The snowshoe webbing squeaked on crusted drifts. Their breath plumed and trailed. Jonas set a trail that bent easy round fallen logs and kept to the same rhythm, so Victoria found her balance and learned the path of his feet. He pointed with his stick to small signs she would have missed if she looked too hard. A feather caught on a twig, a drop of red where a hawk had struck, a hole punched neat where a weasel had gone down through the snow, hunting blind. At the third snare, the loop hung slack and empty. He checked the set, reset the wire, and moved on. "Mostly you catch cold," he said. "Sometimes you catch supper." They found one rabbit near dusk, its white fur clean, its life gone in a simple loop. Jonas took it gentle, said a quiet thanks that sounded like a prayer, though he had not called it by that name, and slipped it into his pouch. "We'll have stew," he said. "You can skin him if you like." "I do not like," she said, "but I will learn." "You'll make a mountain woman yet," he said, and she heard the smile in his voice. They turned homeward. The last of the sun burned red through the trees. The sky above the ridge went the color of an old bruise, and then purple, and then deepening blue. When they reached the yard, evening had fallen true. Jonas hung the snowshoes, stamped his boots, and held the door while Victoria stepped inside with the rabbit pouch and a face flushed from cold and pride. The cabin welcomed them back with the steady shine of coals and the smell of coffee still ghosting the air. Jonas hung his coat and set the rabbit on the table. He showed her the cuts to make so the skin slipped clean, how to pull with both hands but not too hard, or the hide would tear. She swallowed twice and kept on. When the meat lay in neat pieces, he washed the board and laid the hide smooth on a plank near the door to dry. Victoria browned the rabbit with a little pork, then set it to simmer with onion, a carrot, and a pinch of thyme from a twist of dried herbs she found in a jar. The smell rose slow and good. She made dumplings while he swept the hearth and stacked the day's last armload of wood. They ate by lamplight. The stew was rich and simple. The dumplings were soft. The quiet between them had changed. It carried the sound of work well done, and the sense that words said earlier had not fallen on the floor and cracked, but had gone into the ground like seed. After supper, Jonas took up the Bible again. He did not open it right away. He ran his thumb along the edge. "Read something," he said at last. "Something for a man who has stood too long outside his own house." Victoria turned pages until the words met her like an old friend on the road. "Here," she said. "Listen." She read about the shepherd who left 99 in the fold to go after one that had wandered. She read the part where the shepherd found the lost one and carried it home on his shoulders and called his neighbors to rejoice because what was lost was found. Her voice was plain, but it filled the room. Jonas sat with his head bowed, hands laced, as if a rope held them and he had finally decided not to fight it. When she finished, he did not speak for a long breath. Then he said, "If he is that kind of shepherd, I reckon even a hardhead like me might not be beyond his trail." "You are not beyond it," she said. "Not if you can still hear the sound of his steps." He nodded once, slow. "All right," he said. "All right." The lamp flickered as a draft moved by. She rose and tucked the rag tighter in the door seam. When she turned back, he had taken off his hat and laid it on the table. His head was bare in the lamplight, the hair at his temples showing 1 or 2 threads of early gray. He looked younger for a breath, and older the next. like a man caught between two seasons of his own life. "Victoria," he said, and her name sounded careful on his tongue. "I don't aim to pry, but if you want to send that letter to the sheriff tomorrow, I will ride beside you. I stand witness that you came with me free. I will not let that man name what you did as sin to suit his pride." "Thank you," she said, and her voice went small in her throat. "I will write it clean. I will sign it by my full name. I will not hide." "You have my word," he said. "We will post it with my name on it, too." She stepped to the shelf and took down paper and a pencil worn short. She sat at the table and bent her head. Jonas poked the fire and made the room warm and steady, then sat across from her with his hands flat, as if he were keeping the table from rocking while she carved truth into the page. She wrote each line with care. She told the date. She told the train number. She told that she kissed a stranger and called him her husband to save her own safety. She wrote that no force was used and that she went with Jonas Hale to a mountain cabin of her own will and under his protection. She did not pour shame onto the page. She did not plead. She wrote the truth plain enough to read at a glance. When she finished, she slid the paper across to Jonas. He read slow. His lips moved on one or two words like a boy in school, not because he could not read, but because he wanted the sound of it to pass through him. He nodded, fetched the inkwell and a better pen from the chest, and signed his name in a careful hand that showed he did not put it on many papers. "I will add this," he said, and he wrote a line at the bottom, a witness statement that used no fancy words. It said he had offered shelter and had done no harm and would do none. It said he would bring her to town as soon as the road allowed. It said he stood ready to answer any proper question by any proper lawman. They sanded the ink, shook the paper clean, and set it aside to dry. Victoria folded her hands and bowed her head. He did the same. She spoke a small prayer of thanks for strength to write, and for a man who lent his name to her safety. When she lifted her head, something soft played at the edge of her mind, a tune as familiar as her own step. She did not think, only breathed, and then she sang, low and steady, a hymn she had not dared sing in a long while. "Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace." The words filled the cabin like water poured from a good height. The air seemed to lift. Jonas did not move. He stared at the fire, but his eyes were not on it. They were far away and also very near, as if he were looking at a place inside himself that had been dark and now had light at the edges. When she reached the line about streams of mercy never ceasing, his jaw worked. He bowed his head. She sang the last verse in a whisper and let the sound go still. The cabin held the silence after, rich as a held note. Outside, the wind slipped low along the ridge and hummed in the eaves like a viol. Jonas cleared his throat. "That was her song," he said. "My Sarah's. She sang it while she spun, while she baked, while she mended my shirts too neat for a man like me. I thought if I heard it again I would break in half. I did not break. Not quite." Victoria's eyes stung. "I am sorry to cause pain," she said. "You did not," he said. "You called something back. I had not known how much I needed to hear it." He stood and walked to the small shelf where the wooden horse and the old shawl rested. He touched the shawl, then let his hand fall, like a man who did not want to disturb a sleeping child. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," he said. "Law can go crooked under a rich man's thumb. Weather can turn a plan upside down. But I reckon if we speak true and walk straight, the Lord will do what he does." "He will," she said, "even if we cannot see it right away." He banked the fire for the night and set the iron bar across the latch. She tidied the table and set the letter safe inside the Bible, where no coal spark could touch it. They moved through the room like a pair who had learned each other's steps in a day, which was a strange thing and yet felt simple. Scout turned 3 times before the hearth and folded down with a sigh that said the world was in good order. "Tomorrow," Jonas said, "we ride at first light if the sky stays open. If snow comes again, we wait. I will not risk the creek with a paper we need to keep dry." "I will be ready," Victoria said. He took the chair by the fire. She took the bed behind the quilt. She pulled the blanket up and lay on her side, eyes open to the glow at the edge of the curtain. The hymn lingered soft at the back of her throat. She did not sing again. She let it hum in her bones. In the half-light, she thought of the stranger on the platform and the foolish courage that had carried her mouth to his. She thought of his steady arm and the words he had given her for shield. She thought of the grave under the pines and the hand he had set on the cross, fingers pressed like a man trying to warm a stone. She saw the room as it had been this morning, and as it was now, with a new brace in the roof and a new word in the air. The word was hope. Outside, the sky held clear. Stars burned cold over the ridge. The creek sang lower now, muffled by fresh edge ice. The wind laid down and went to sleep somewhere in a fold of the hills. Sleep found them too. It took Jonas in his chair with one hand on the Bible that held her letter, and it took Victoria in the bed with a small smile that stayed even as her breath slowed and the long day slipped away. Morning would bring the road and whatever waited down it. For now God held the night, the cabin, and the 2 souls within as steady as a beam braced set true. Morning came clear and brittle, the kind of cold that cracked branches in the forest and made even the creek run slow. Jonas was already outside when Victoria rose, the sound of his axe echoing down the slope. She lit the stove, added a stick of pine, and watched the blue flame lick up through the cracks until the room grew warm enough to breathe without seeing her breath. Scout stretched near the hearth and yawned wide. She brewed coffee, the smell rich and good, and set a skillet on the stove. When Jonas came in, steam lifted from his beard and coat. He stamped the snow from his boots, hanging his hat by the door. "Morning," he said, shaking off the cold. "Looks to be a fair day. We can ride to town if the creek crossing holds." Victoria nodded, setting out 2 tin cups. "The letter's ready," she said. "We'll post it straight away." He poured his coffee, eyes steady. "It'll clear your name and mine both." They ate simple: bacon, coffee, and yesterday's bread toasted over the fire. Afterward, Jonas saddled the gelding, wrapped the letter inside oiled cloth, and tucked it into his coat pocket. The ride down Birch Creek would take half the day if the road was good. Victoria packed biscuits and jerky in a cloth sack. By mid-morning they started out, the snow shallow under the trees. The mountains opened wide before them, the trail shining hard in places where ice glazed the slope. They rode single file, the horse's breath puffing in the cold. The ride was quiet until they neared the valley. Smoke rose from the chimneys of Silvervale, thin lines that curled against the pale sky. Victoria's heart quickened. She could almost see the station where she had fled, the wooden crates, the moment her life had changed. Jonas slowed the horse as they reached the bridge over the frozen creek. "Keep your eyes sharp," he said quietly. "That man of yours, he might not have given up." "I reckon he hasn't," she said softly. They crossed without trouble, the sound of hooves dull against the ice. But as they neared the main road, 2 riders appeared from the bend, one in a brown duster, the other wearing a badge that caught the sun. Jonas lifted a hand, halting the horse. "Morning, Sheriff," he called evenly. Sheriff Duncan Reeves rode closer, reining in his mare. His gray beard was rimmed with frost. "Morning, Hale. Heard tell you've been hard to find." Jonas stiffened slightly. "Just been keeping to myself." The sheriff nodded once, his expression unreadable. "You'd best come along to town. There's a matter that needs sorting." Victoria gripped the edge of the saddle. "Sheriff," she said, "we came to bring a letter." "I know," Reeves interrupted gently, "and I'll see it delivered. But there's a report been filed. One says you were taken against your will." His eyes rested on her. "Miss Whitfield, is that true?" She blinked, stunned. "No, sir, it isn't." "I believe you," Reeves said, "but the man who filed it is raising trouble with the territorial judge. Says he's got witnesses." Jonas's voice dropped low. "That'd be Eldon Cross, I reckon." Reeves nodded. "The same. He's been in my office all week, flashing papers and claiming you stole his fiancée." Victoria's stomach turned. "He's lying." "I don't doubt it," the sheriff said. "But law moves slower than gossip. I'm asking you both to ride in and settle it straight." Jonas looked to Victoria. "Your choice," he said. She took a deep breath. "We'll go." They rode in silence the last mile. Silvervale looked smaller than Victoria remembered, its boardwalks dusted with snow, its saloon windows frosted. People turned to watch as they passed. Whispers moved like wind through dry grass. Sheriff Reeves led them to the small jail beside the telegraph office. Inside, the air was warm, but heavy. He motioned for them to sit while he took a file from his desk. "I'll wire the judge to hold any warrant till I hear your statement," he said. The door opened. Boots scraped against the floorboards. Eldon Cross stepped inside, fine coat buttoned high, gloves spotless. His smile was thin as a blade. "Well," he said smoothly, "there's the runaway schoolmarm and her hero. You've cost me a good deal of worry, Victoria." Jonas rose slow. "You best watch your words." Eldon's gaze flicked to him, cold and mocking. "You'll get your say, mountain man. The law's on my side now." He turned toward Reeves. "I filed a sworn affidavit. This woman was taken under duress." Victoria stood. "That's a lie. I went with Mr. Hale freely." Eldon shrugged. "That's not what the witnesses claim. The porter saw her cry on the platform. Another said she begged for mercy." "I was afraid of you," she said, her voice rising. "Not him." For a moment, the room went still. Even the sheriff looked uneasy. Jonas clenched his fists at his sides. Reeves rubbed his temple. "I'll take both statements. But until this is cleared, I can't have either of you leave town without my say-so." Eldon smiled. "Then my work here is done." He tipped his hat to Victoria. "You'll come to your senses soon enough." Jonas took a step forward, but Reeves raised a hand. "Let him go. Law'll sort it." When the door closed behind Eldon, Victoria sank into the chair, shaking. "He won't stop, Sheriff. You don't know him." Reeves sighed. "I've met his kind. Slick words, deep pockets." He looked to Jonas. "You got friends here?" Jonas shook his head. "Only the mountains." "Then you best stay close to the jailhouse tonight," Reeves said. "Safer than the open road. I'll see what I can do come morning." Jonas nodded. "Much obliged." Later, as dusk settled over the town, Victoria stood by the jail window, watching the lamps flicker along Main Street. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and soft. Jonas leaned against the wall near her, arms folded. "You all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled. "He'll twist everything. He always does." Jonas's gaze softened. "Then we twist it back with truth. He's got money, but we've got the Lord." She turned toward him, her fear easing a little. "You still believe that?" He paused. "I'm starting to again. They shared a small, tired smile. When the sheriff came back later with blankets and a lantern, he said, "You two rest easy. I'll send word to the judge at first light. With luck, this'll blow over quick." But as the night deepened and the town quieted, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that Eldon's reach ran farther than the law's patience. She watched the snow fall, each flake bright against the dark, and whispered a prayer. Not for escape this time, but for strength. In the corner, Jonas whispered one too. Snow kept falling through the night, quiet as ash from a dying fire. When dawn broke over Silvervale, the world looked clean but uneasy. Sheriff Reeves stepped into the small jail office, coffee steaming in one hand, his breath fogging the air. Jonas and Victoria had slept on benches by the stove, their coats pulled tight. Reeves set his cup down. "I sent the wire," he said. "Judge will answer by sundown, maybe sooner if the line's clear. Till then you're free to walk, just don't leave town." Jonas nodded. "Much obliged, Sheriff. I'll see about feed for the horse." Victoria stood, brushing her skirts. "I'll find a place to warm some bread. We won't cause trouble." The sheriff smiled faintly. "You're not the ones I'm worried about." Outside, the snow crunched under their boots. Silvervale looked harmless in daylight. Shops opening, smoke from the smithy, a boy sweeping the boardwalk. But under that calm, whispers spread like dry grass fire. Eyes followed them, curious and sharp. They stopped at the general store. Martha Gibbons, the storekeeper's wife, greeted Victoria with a warm smile that reached her eyes. "You come in, dear. You look half froze." Victoria stepped inside, grateful for the smell of flour and coffee beans. Martha poured her a mug of chicory brew and leaned close. "We've heard the talk. Don't you fret. Some of us know Eldon Cross is kind. He's played these tricks before." Victoria's eyes stung. "You're kind to say so." "Not kind, just fair," Martha said. "You keep your chin high. Truth's a patient thing. It'll catch up." When Jonas came in, brushing snow from his shoulders, Martha gave him a nod of respect. "You keep that girl safe, Mr. Hale. Silvervale's small, but decency still holds here." "I aim to," he said simply. They bought flour, salt, and coffee, then left the store. Jonas could feel the stares from the saloon porch, hear the low laughter. But he didn't rise to it. "No good comes from feeding gossip," he murmured. "Let them talk." Victoria walked beside him, hands tight on her shawl. "He's poisoning the well before we even drink from it." "Then we dig another," Jonas said. They spent the rest of the morning in the sheriff's barn, tending the horse and keeping out of sight. Snow turned to sleet by noon, drumming on the roof. Jonas sat on a bale of hay, checking the rifle's sight, while Victoria wrote another letter, this one to the school board that still expected her in Wyoming. She told them she'd been delayed by weather, nothing more. "You've got courage," Jonas said quietly. "Not many could face a man like Cross and still write neat." "I learned to hide my shaking years ago," she said. "Schoolrooms are full of bullies, just smaller ones." He smiled at that. "Fair point." By late afternoon, Sheriff Reeves returned, wiping the rain from his hat. "Judge sent word. He won't rule till he sees both sides. You'll have to stay put 2 nights, maybe 3. Jonas frowned. "We'll find a corner out of the way." "I've a better offer," Reeves said. "You stay in my back room. Safer than the boarding house, and the stove works." Victoria hesitated, but the sheriff's kindness left no room for pride. "Thank you," she said. That evening, after stew and bread by the sheriff's fire, the 3 sat together while the storm hissed outside. Reeves leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. "You know," he said, "I used to ride with the Army Scouts. Saw men like Cross then, too. Ones who thought the law was a tool, not a trust. They fall hard when truth catches them. Jonas nodded slowly. I'll hold to that. Victoria folded her hands in her lap. I keep asking why God led me to that station when he could have sent the train another route. Reeves smiled wearily. Maybe he wanted to show you not all men break their word. The fire popped, throwing orange light across their faces. Outside, wind carried the sound of a distant whistle from the frozen valley below. Later, when the sheriff dozed, Jonas looked at Victoria. You should rest, he said softly. I can't, she whispered. Every creak sounds like his boots on the floor. Jonas studied her a moment. I've had nights like that. You learn to pray through them instead of around them. She met his gaze. And what do you pray for? He hesitated. That I'll know when to speak and when to stay still. That I won't let fear do my thinking. Her eyes softened. Then maybe I'll pray the same. A quiet settled between them, the kind that needed no words. The next morning dawned gray, the storm spent. Jonas helped Reeves check the telegraph line. Victoria brewed coffee in the tin pot. The town was quieter, shamed perhaps by its own gossip. A few folks nodded kindly as they passed. When they returned to the jailhouse, the sheriff held a paper in his hand. Judge wired back, he said, smiling at last. He's dismissed the charge. Cross overstepped. Victoria let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Jonas closed his eyes for a moment, then said, Thank you, Lord. Reeves folded the letter and handed it to them. You're free to go, but I'd watch the road out. Cross won't take kindly to losing. Jonas nodded. He'll find I don't scare easy. Victoria looked at Reeves with tears in her eyes. You saved our lives, Sheriff. He waved it off. Just did my job. The rest, well, the Almighty's got longer arms than I do. As they mounted the gelding outside, Silvervale lay quiet behind them. Snow glittered under the pale sun. Victoria looked back once, seeing the faint curl of smoke rise from the sheriff's chimney, and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Jonas turned in the saddle. You ready to go home? She smiled faintly. If you mean Birch Creek, yes. If you mean peace, I'm halfway there. He touched the brim of his hat. That's close enough for today. They rode up the mountain trail as the wind carried their breath away in white clouds, two figures heading back toward the wilderness that had first brought them together. Behind them, the town shrank to a shadow, and ahead, the promise of quiet days and the slow mending of hearts. The ride home was quiet. Snow fell in soft ribbons, and the valley breathed calm again. When they reached Birch Creek, the cabin waited with its chimney smoking steady, a welcome against the cold. Jonas unsaddled the horse while Victoria set a lamp in the window. The silence of safety felt fragile, like glass that could crack if spoken of too loud. Inside, warmth bloomed from the fire. They shared coffee and leftover bread, listening to the crackle. Then, far down the slope, a single echoing hoofbeat broke the stillness. Scout barked once, then went quiet, tail low. Jonas reached for the rifle, eyes narrowing. A knock came, 3 firm raps. Jonas lifted the bar. A deputy stood there, snow clinging to his coat, badge glinting. Evening, he said calmly. Name's Taza Gray Wolf. Sheriff Reeves sent me. Jonas nodded him in. Victoria poured coffee. Taza spoke plain. Eldon Cross hired men to follow you. They rode out this morning, asking after your trail. Sheriff thought I'd better warn you. Jonas's jaw tightened. We figured he wouldn't quit easy. Taza nodded. He won't, but he's a fool if he thinks fear wins in these hills. Keep your lamps shaded and your gun near. If trouble rides in, signal 3 quick lights. I'll be on watch at the ranger shack. Thank you, Victoria said softly. Taza tipped his hat and rode into the dusk. Jonas bolted the door. They sat long after, the wind whispering around the eaves. When the creek stilled and the stars came out, Jonas said, "He may come, but we won't run." Victoria met his eyes. "No, not again." They prayed then, simple words for courage and truth. The fire burned low, steady as a heartbeat, while outside the wind carried away the last trace of fear. Morning came clear and sharp. Birch Creek shimmered with new snow, and smoke lifted in a straight line from the chimney. Jonas saddled the horse, while Victoria packed bread and coffee in a cloth. "We'll tell it plain," he said. "No fear in truth." She nodded, heart tight but steady. They rode down the mountain, trail, sunlight striking the frozen creek like glass. By noon, Silvervale appeared below, quiet but watchful. Folks gathered outside the meeting hall, whispering as the two dismounted. Martha Gibbons waved them inside, her jaw set like iron. "You just speak your piece, dear," she told Victoria. "The town's ears are open." Inside, the sheriff and Deputy Taza stood near the stove. Eldon Cross lounged by the window, polished and smiling cold. His two hired men leaned against the wall, hands resting near their belts. Sheriff Reeves cleared his throat. "We're here to set the record straight." Victoria stepped forward, her voice clear as a church bell. "I was not taken. I sought protection from cruelty. This man lies to keep power he no longer deserves." She laid the signed letter on the table. "Here's proof." Martha, Taza, and Reeves each spoke in turn, their words quiet but firm. When Eldon sneered and called her a liar, Jonas stepped forward. "You said you loved her," he said, "but love don't cage a soul." The room fell silent. Eldon's smirk faltered under the town's stare. Reeves spoke last. "I've heard enough. The law stands with truth. Mr. Cross, you're done here." Eldon turned pale, fury twisting his face. He started to speak, then saw the badge on Taza's chest and thought better. Without another word, he stalked out into the snow. The crowd stirred, murmurs turning into nods. Martha clasped Victoria's hands. "You did right," she whispered. "The whole town saw it." Jonas tipped his hat to the sheriff. "Much obliged." As they stepped outside, sunlight spilled over the valley. The air felt lighter, clean. Victoria looked up at Jonas, her voice trembling with relief. "It's over?" He smiled, slow and sure. "It's beginning." They rode home through a sky turning gold, the wind at their backs, and the long shadow of fear fading behind them on the trail. Snow drifted light as feathers over the trail home. The air smelled of pine and peace. Victoria rode behind Jonas, the hush of the forest broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the steady beat of the gelding's hooves. Her shoulders loosened for the first time in months. Justice had been done, and truth, plain and strong, had carried farther than any lie. When they reached the cabin, the valley felt new. Smoke still rose from the chimney, and Scout bounded out, barking with joy. Jonas smiled faintly. Even the dog knew we'd come back. Inside, the fire had burned down to coals. Victoria stirred it, adding fresh wood. The crackle filled the silence like comfort made into sound. Jonas took down the kettle and poured coffee, its warmth chasing the cold from their hands. For a while, neither spoke. The stillness between them wasn't empty. It was full of all they'd endured, and the quiet understanding that they had crossed through fire and come out whole. Victoria broke the silence first. "What happens now?" Jonas looked into the flames. "Now we live, I reckon. We mend fences, bake bread, and see what the Lord has in mind next." She smiled. "That sounds like peace." He nodded. Hard-won peace, the only kind that lasts. She stepped to the window. Sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the snow to a field of diamonds. Do you ever think, she said softly, that maybe sorrow carves out room in the heart for joy? Jonas studied her, his rough hands wrapped around the cup. I do now. They shared a small laugh, quiet and tender. Outside, a jay cried, sharp and alive, and the sound made them both look up. Life was moving again. Slow, steady, faithful. Jonas rose and fetched his carving knife. He pulled a block of pine from the shelf. Figured I'd make something, he said. A sign for the gate. Maybe it's time this place had a name. Victoria tilted her head. What will you call it? He thought a moment. Grace Creek, because that's what brought us here, and what kept us breathing. Her eyes shone. Then I'll paint the letters. By evening, the cabin smelled of bread baking and pine shavings. Jonas set the carved sign by the door to dry, and Victoria laid the table for supper. Lamplight glowed over the wood walls, warm as a promise kept. Outside, the stars began to rise, clear, bright, unafraid. Jonas watched them through the window and said quietly, The Lord surely writes straight with crooked lines? Victoria smiled, heart full. And sometimes he uses a kiss to start the sentence. They laughed softly, the sound mingling with the wind. In the quiet after the storm, hope lived again, steady as a flame in a cold mountain night. Morning sunlight poured through the window, soft and golden. The cabin smelled of fresh bread and pine smoke. Victoria took the loaves from the oven, steam curling into the cool air. Jonas set 2 tin plates on the table, the wood freshly scrubbed. Never thought this house would see a woman's hand again, he said quietly. Victoria smiled. And I never thought I'd find peace in a cabin at the world's edge. They ate in companionable silence, the bread warm and sweet. Scout dozed by the fire, tail twitching. Outside, Birch Creek ran bright beneath melting ice. Jonas leaned back, gaze thoughtful. We could start again here, he said. Plant a garden, maybe build a second room. Victoria looked up from her cup. Would that be for me? Or for us? He hesitated, then smiled. I reckon there's no difference anymore. The words hung between them like sunlight, gentle, certain. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Then let's make this a home worth keeping. Jonas squeezed her fingers, rough palm warm against hers. We already have. Outside, the wind carried the scent of thawing earth, and the valley seemed to breathe with them, alive, renewed, forgiven. The day passed quiet, full of small work and soft laughter. Victoria hung wash by the creek while Jonas mended the fence. By afternoon, clouds gathered pink and gray across the ridges. The smell of rain drifted in. She called out, "Storm's coming." Jonas looked up from his work, smiling faintly. Let it. We've seen worse. They hurried the tools inside just as the first drops hit the roof. Thunder rolled down the valley like distant drums. Scout hid under the table, tail wagging nervously. Jonas poured coffee while Victoria closed the shutters. The cabin filled with lamplight and the comfort of belonging. A knock startled them. 3 even taps, quick as a heartbeat. Jonas opened the door to find Taza Grey Wolf standing in the rain, coat glistening. Evening, the deputy said. Sheriff sent me with word. Cross won't trouble you again. He's left the territory. Relief swept through the room like warm wind. Victoria clasped her hands. Thank God, Taza nodded. Truth has long legs. It caught up. He accepted coffee, warming by the fire for a moment, then rose to go. You two keep living straight. That's the best kind of justice there is. Jonas shook his hand firmly. "You're welcome here anytime." When the door closed, Victoria whispered, "Free at last." Jonas smiled. Free and home. Outside, the storm rolled east, leaving only starlight and the soft rush of Birch Creek. The snow had stopped, leaving the valley silver under the moon. The cabin glowed with quiet warmth, smoke curling soft from the chimney. Victoria sat by the fire sewing a patch on Jonas's coat, while he stacked the last of the split wood by the door. Outside, Birch Creek murmured, a lullaby to end a long, hard season. When the chores were done, Jonas poured coffee and joined her. "Never thought peace would sound like this," he said. She smiled, eyes gentle. "Maybe peace isn't silence. Maybe it's safety with someone who listens." He looked at her across the firelight. "You planning to stay a while, Miss Whitfield?" She folded the coat and set it aside. "I reckon I am, Mr. Hale, unless you tell me otherwise." He reached across the small table, taking her hand. "Then we'll see spring together. You, me, and this place the Lord saw fit to give back." Victoria's eyes shone with quiet tears. "It feels like starting over, only stronger." Jonas nodded. "Ain't nothing wrong with being made new." The fire popped softly. Scout sighed in his sleep. Outside, the stars brightened, watching two souls who had found their way home through faith, forgiveness, and a single brave kiss. Winter loosened its grip on Birch Creek one morning without warning. Snow melted from the eaves in bright streams, and the air smelled of wet pine and earth waking from sleep. Victoria opened the cabin door and let the light pour in. It touched the floorboards, the table, even the Bible on the shelf. Everything looked newer somehow. Jonas came in from the yard, sleeves rolled, hands muddy from mending the garden fence. "Ground's soft," he said with a smile. "Time to plant again?" Victoria laughed. "You sound like a man who's waited too long for green." He grinned back. "Maybe I have." They spent the day turning the soil by hand, their laughter mixing with the creek's steady song. When they grew tired, they sat on the fence rail and watched geese fly north, white wings flashing in the sun. "I used to hate the sound of trains," she said suddenly. "It meant leaving, running, fear. But now the world feels wide again, not dangerous." Jonas nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "The world didn't change. We did." That evening, he carried in a small box from the workshop. Inside lay a wooden ring carved smooth from pine. "Don't have gold or silver," he said quietly. "But I made this for truth's sake." Her breath caught. "Jonas." He knelt, shy but certain. "You gave me back life, Victoria. Will you make this place home with me? Properly?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, with all my heart." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, light as a promise kept. They prayed together, words simple and sure. Thanks for mercy, for mountains, for love rebuilt from ashes. Outside, Birch Creek laughed over its thawed stones, carrying winter away. Spring sunlight streamed through the cabin window, golden and alive. Victoria stood by the door, a shawl around her shoulders, watching Birch Creek sparkle in the distance. The air smelled of wet soil and blooming pine. Inside, Jonas packed tools for a day's work, humming low. He turned to her with a grin. "You coming to see the fence line?" She nodded, slipping her hand into his. "I wouldn't miss it." They walked together through the thawing meadow. The ground was soft beneath their boots, the world green again. Birds flitted between branches, and far off, thunder rolled gentle and low, the promise of rain, not ruin. Jonas stopped, glancing towards the horizon. "Strange," he said quietly. How God can turn pain into something worth keeping. Victoria smiled up at him. That's grace. He kissed her forehead. That's love. The wind carried their laughter down the valley, bright as the creek itself. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.